How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to do a little bit of a request video for Hashaton, the Scarab's Fist. This was requested in one of my comments a little bit ago, so we're going to go ahead and get into this. Now, if you don't know the lore behind Hashaton, he is one of the members of the Chitin court from Amonkhet, which reveres what they consider the old gods of Amonkhet, which is the Scorpion god, the Locust god, and the Scarab god. But then there's also mention on the copy of Corpse Augur that comes in the Precon of a possible Fly God and Wasp God that we've not ever seen before. So those cards might eventually make it into the game at some point. We're not sure though. But for now, let's take a look real quick. If you didn't catch the Precon upgrade video to see what Hashaton was, he's a 1/3 that costs black and a white. You discard, whenever you discard a card, you can pay 2 and a blue to make a zombified copy of a creature that you've discarded. So you're eternalizing them, because the Eternals, there was a lot of 4/4 Eternals, like when you eternalized a creature before, it became a 4/4 copy of the original creature. So I consider that just being eternalized. So let's get into what we can do here. Now, the creatures you pitch and turn into these Eternals, you do not actually have to have them be zombies. They can be anything. So we can use and abuse that to make some really nasty creatures come out ahead of curve and really do some dangerous things to our opponents. So let's go ahead and talk about the deck that I have titled All Hail the Scarab. So first and foremost, we need ways to discard creatures for Hashaton to work with. So let's start off with some of the looting cards I want to put into this deck, some of which I used in the Precon upgrade video for Temet. That includes Compulsion, Tortured Existence, Kitza, Oddball Elite, Collector's Vault, Eevee Fry, Gyre Reach Sanitarium, Likeness Looter, and Currency Converter. All of these are relatively cheap ways to kick a discard into the graveyard for Hashaton to turn into a zombie for us. On average, you're going to be paying about 4 to 5 mana, 1 to 2 for the loot, and then 3 for the Hashaton trigger to make a 4/4 copy of whatever you're going to be throwing into the grave. Of these looters, I wanted to point out a couple extra functions they have since they did not appear in the other video. First up is Eevee Fry from the Assassin's Creed set. You pay 1, tap and draw and discard a card. The bonus here is that if the discarded card was a creature, you can make target creature unblockable until end of turn, which can come in handy if you have something you want to swing without exposing it to bad blocks. And then we also have Currency Converter, which is another low-cost loot effect with a bonus. You can choose to exile whatever you're discarding, regardless of how it was discarded, and then later on you can tap the converter to put one of those cards that you've exiled with it back into your graveyard to get a treasure if it was a land, or if it was not in land, you can get a 2/2 rogue token instead. Either way, it's a nice cheap way to loot, and you don't have to exile if you don't want to. And then next is cards we're taking straight from the Precon and sliding them into this deck. The Precon holds a large chunk of the framework for this deck, including a big amount of the lands in it, but these are the non-lands that we're going to carry over from that list into this one, with Accursed Dunyard, which can help us keep Hashaton and any of our other zombies, the tokens, alive. Champion of Wits, which digs deeper into the deck and gives us a discard later in the game to use with Hashaton. Skylord Eternal, which gives all of our eternalized creature tokens flying and be able to punch in with some damage. With all the discarding we're doing, Archfiend of Ifnir is going to put in a lot of work in helping us cull our opponent's creatures, and it has its own cycling ability to help make a copy of itself off of Hashaton's trigger. Damn is a great piece of removal, and there's no reason not to include it here when it came with the Precon. Maskwood Nexus is going to help make some of our zombie keyworded synergies that much better when everything is a zombie. Prophet of the Scarab can help us reload, but a word of caution with this one. It's not going to be as versatile of a card here as it is in the Precon, where it focuses on zombies as the creature type of choice, because most of what you're pitching to the grave is not going to be zombies. So after a wipe, the Prophet is not going to be as good as it was in that other deck, but I still think it's worth a slot for the times you can loot in response and make a token copy and draw some cards before it all blows up. The Scarab God is making an appearance for a variety of reasons. First off, flavor. Hashaton is the Scarab God's guy, after all. So it would feel kind of weird not having the big bad bug god in the deck. Second, it can be used as a way to eternalize creatures from any graveyard to add to our eternal army. And lastly is that upkeep trigger. It can add up really fast the more zombies we make and the more life that can be drained down and the more we can scry down through our deck to get to bigger and better cards. Ret 2 Mystic is also a great card to include here, giving cycling to all of our creatures for 1 and a blue, and when it's combined with Hashaton, you get to make a copy of any creature in your deck and draw a card for 3 blue, and then discarding the creature away, and that just adds a redundancy with our other looting cards. Temet is also coming back from the Precon, but he's going to slide into the 99. He gives us a looting trigger on attack, but also helps boost our eternalized creatures by at least +2/+2 on our turn by drawing at the beginning of the turn if he's down, and his looting attack trigger. That alone almost makes it worth running, and it can be even more damage if we're drawing cards during our first main phase. Swords of Plowshares is just one of the best removal spells ever printed. It comes in the Precon, and there's just no reason not to run it here. On Wings of Gold has a couple things going for us. Primarily, it's going to be a redundancy with the Skylord Eternal to give our zombie tokens flying, and plus any other token creatures we might have lying around. It also gives +1/+1 boost, and it's going to create tokens for us as we're reanimating things or bringing creatures back to our hand from the graveyard, or when the Scarab God removes something from our graveyard to eternalize it, we're going to get a 1/1 zombie token to work with. And then our last carryover from the Precon is also the strongest card from it, Renewed Solidarity. It's a nice +1/+0 power boost, but the big thing for us is that token copying ability. One thing that you have to think of with this enchantment is it's a version of Ocelot Pride. You get the copies of your tokens at the end step, but on a 3-mana enchantment instead of a 1-mana creature, but it doesn't have to have a send or any kind of life gain to get that trigger, but it has the drawback of only affecting selected creature type, but it also has a much more affordable price tag of about $15 as of this video. I do not think that it's going to stay that low for long, though. It's just a really good card, and any kind of token doubling card that exists in white has a high price tag that is escalating due to their popularity. I don't recommend Anointed Procession, Mondrak, or Ocelot Pride very often due to their price tags, but this is, for the time being, a good budget version of a card like that. So we have our discard outlets and carryovers from the Precon, but what are we going to be actually pitching to Hashaton to make it better to go ahead and just do that rather than hard casting spells? Well, how about something like Ancient Gold Dragon? I love this card. It can do some fun things for us. The damage coming off of it doesn't really matter so much. It's the damage trigger that we want. So getting it down earlier than normal with Hashaton, making an eternalized version of it is really good. And remember, Maskwood Nexus, those fairy dragon tokens then become zombies when the Nexus is out, and he gains all the benefits of being a zombie in the deck. In the same vein of ways to abuse that Maskwood Nexus, here's Astral Dragon. Eternalizing it actually makes it a little bit bigger, but the trick is to also make sure that the copy tokens that it makes are also zombies. That's why we need the Nexus. And why is that? Because copying a non-creature with Renewed Solidarity out results in additional copies of the permanent at the end of the turn, since those dragons will be zombies thanks to the Nexus. Word of advice, copying Renewed Solidarity, yeah, you'll thank me later. Moving away from things that you can abuse with Nexus, let's toss Hashaton and Archon of Cruelty. Normally this is an 8-drop that you would try to ditch and then reanimate, but you can get a slightly smaller version for about 4 to 5 mana off of Hashaton, binning the original so you can reanimate it later to get double your fun off of it, and then you get more discards and draws and all that good fun stuff. Another abusable Archon to make copies of here is Ashen Rider. This thing, entering or dying, allows us to exile any target permanent, and being able to do that ahead of curve and repeatedly is going to win you some games. One of my favorite creatures to slow down small tokens with is Massacre Worm. Being able to make a token copy of it, then reanimate the original, is going to bring a lot of pain to our opponents, especially if they're trying to flood the board with their little stuff and all their tokens. For some single target removal, let's slot in Meteor Golem, Noxious Gearhulk, Riptide Gearhulk, Ravenous Chupacabra, and Hostage Taker. All of these creatures will be coming in to either destroy, bounce, or exile our opponent's creatures, giving us a little bit of removal and breathing room as we play the game. Another piece of removal, but is not targeted, but is still really good, is Rotten Mouth Viper. No need to sacrifice things to reduce the casting cost if we're going to use Hashaton to eternalize it or reanimate it later on from the grave. The rest of this creature pile is going to be what I call the best of the rest, starting off with a Bone Miser coming from the Precon upgrade list because we're going to be discarding a lot of cards. So it makes just sense to have it in the deck as well. Every card we discard is going to net us more zombie tokens, mana, or additional card draws when the Miser is around, making it a must-have in the deck. Cloud Blazer is a great card to have an eternalized version of because it goes from a 2/2 to a 4/4 with the flying. It also gives us life and drawing more cards while not costing any more mana than just hard casting. It already costs 5 mana to cast, and it's going to cost you 4 to 5 mana to make the zombified token version. It's just a great rate on the card. In the same vein as the Cloud Blazer, Inspiring Overseer is what I consider the half-size version of Cloud Blazer. It's cheaper to cast, it nets you half the life and half the cards, but making it into a 4/4 flyer is just awesome. And then we have a pair of Overlords in the deck, Flood Pits and Mistmoors going into the deck. The blue one's going to give us another draw and discard outlet, while the white one's going to give us more bodies to work with to punch in more damage. Of course, the Overlord of the Balemerc would be a great card in this deck, but the cost of that one has skyrocketed thanks to popularity in Modern, so I'm not going to recommend it here. But if you have a copy, it would be a great upgrade here. Moving on to what I am recommending, Rune Scarred Demon. It kind of breaks my own rules of not running tutors very often, but it's going to be here because we're not running broken combos or anything like that in the deck. And once in a while, you're going to want to go ahead and get something out of your deck to recover or get specific creatures to help out that you want to make copies of. So this is in here to do that kind of thing. Silent Hall Creeper is also a great card to get in here because it's a way to get an unblockable creature for 4 and 5 damage a swipe when you eternalize it. You get a card off of it, and then you're putting the counters on there, and then you can just turn it into something else that's better that's already sitting on the board. And of course, I just could not leave out the Sad Robot. It's just a great card to make into a zombie here. Get a land, draw a card on death. It's just a classic that I still put in most of my non-green decks. Now, since we are going to be pitching so many creatures into the grave, we need ways to take advantage of all the bodies piling up down there, and that's where Recursion comes in. We have a couple of different ways to do that, both straight to the battlefield and back to our hand. For one-shot straight reanimation, I'm running a copy of Coiling Rebirth and Unburial Rites. Coiling Rebirth can get us 2 of any non-legendary creature, the original and that token copy, as long as you've gifted somebody a card when you cast it. And Unburial Rites is basically the best black and white reanimation spell ever printed, with a basic Rise from the Dead on the front side and a version of Late to Dinner on the flashback side of the card, giving us a pair of creatures from the grave. For mass reanimation, I'm going to use a copy of Living Death. Now, this serves several purposes in the deck. One is a recovery from a wipe, getting everything back and negating the wipe. Second is just us dumping off all the original creatures for Hashaton to eternalize, filling up our grave, and then we can swap the token versions for their original counterparts if the battlefield's kind of getting out of control. And lastly, it helps deal with indestructible creatures, because damn isn't going to cut it if someone is carrying something like a heroic intervention and you know they have it. Living Death does not care about that because they have to sacrifice those creatures. Those creatures are still going to be dead, and we get to swap in our graveyard that we've been filling for Hashaton. We also have cards that bring creatures back to our hand so we can discard them again and make more copies with Hashaton. I've already talked about Tortured Existence earlier in the looting category, but it also does this for us to get our stuff back in discard. I'm also going to be using a copy of Macabre Waltz, which lets us do the same kind of thing. And for a repeatable version, Phyrexian Reclamation. Each one lets us get creatures back to our hand, and in the case of the Waltz and the Tortured Existence, they give us a discard as well to kick off the eternalizing all over again. We're also going to be using some creatures to do some reanimating as we discard them to Hashaton, and those are Archpriest of Shadows, Emeria Shepherd, Karmic Guide, and Ravos Soul Tender. The Archpriest of Shadows allows us to use its backup ability to make another creature a little bit bigger, and if it can get through, it's going to bring back another creature from our grave, and then the Archpriest will do the same thing as the game proceeds. We also have Emeria Shepherd, which is amazing in this deck. You can cheat a token copy of it out early, and then you can tailor your future land drops to either reanimate straight to the battlefield by dropping a plains, or just play a different land drop altogether and bring back something to your hand so then you can discard it again. It is just very versatile. And then we have Karmic Guide. This is one of the original reanimation creatures in Magic, and it's going to do some work here for us. Just remember, you will have to pay the echo cost on the token copy the next turn, or it will have to be sacrificed. And then we have Ravos Soul Tender, which is great here as well. Every upkeep this thing's alive, you're getting a creature back to your hand, so you have a constant creature flow coming back to your hand to discard every turn. As for the rest of the deck, it mostly consists of just mana rocks and a small handful of synergistic cards that I want to mention here, but didn't really fit any of the other categories. First up is Season of Weaving. It works beautifully in this deck. The 3-paw mode bounces all non-token, non-land permanents, which leaves all of our eternalized creatures on the board while bouncing all of your opponent's non-token things. And of course, then you get to keep a choice of either drawing a couple of cards with it, or turn one of your non-tokens into a token before it gets bounced back to your hand and keep it on the board. Then we also have a new card from Aetherdrift, Scrounging Skyray. This thing loves you discarding cards and grows for every card you discard, and it's cheap enough that even if you just drop it early as its standard version, there's plenty of opportunities to make it into a significant threat. And the bonus here is that it has its own cycling for you to drop it into Hashaton and get a 4/4 version of it without any other cards to trigger the discard. Then I want to run a copy of Caretaker's Talent. It's just really good in any deck where tokens are a thing. Every time we make a zombie token each turn, we can net a card. It can copy one of our tokens that are existing already. And then it gives a +2/+2 anthem to all of our tokens, making our 4/4s into 6/6s for our opponents to have to deal with. And then the last card in the deck is a bit of a wild card, no pun intended, but I wanted to give it a try, and that is Geralf the Fleshwright. On occasion, you're going to get the 2/2 zombie rogue token, but the +1/+1 counters are the bigger deal here, because as we're making the ancillary tokens and our eternalized token copies, we're going to be able to start stacking +1/+1 counters on some of these tokens. And as I said, it's a bit of a wild card, and there's probably something you would rather try out in the slot, but for this list, it's what I'm going to go ahead and try out. So what do you guys think? I had a lot of fun building this deck, and I've actually built a version of this using a lot of the base of this deck in Arena, which I will be showing off gameplay for here in probably about a week or so. A lot of this stuff just already exists in Arena, so it worked out pretty nicely. So let me know what you think down in the comments below. What would you add? What would you take out of what I've done here? Would you make it more powerful? What would you do? And as always, thank you for watching. Have a great day, and I will see you in the next video.